Alright folks, I'm just going to do a really quick tutorial here on, well, as you can see, the N2F return object. It's one of the extensions that we actually ship with N2F, and it is an extension that is shipped with the core, but it's not part of the core, which basically means that it didn't satisfy our requirement that it is something that everyone needs to use. It is, however, something that we think everyone should use, because it is a very good way to add a little bit more information to your communication between functions and the parts of the code that call them. So without any further ado, we will get into it here. Let's see. Okay, so just going to do sort of a mock scenario here. Just assume that this code has utility, because honestly I don't know if it does. We're going to do a read file, and as you see, take the file name, argument, parameter, whatever you want to call it, whatever the proper term is. Check that the file exists, and if it doesn't exist, we're going to return false, which is important. We'll get to that in a second. Do a return file get contents file name. So basically, you give it a file name, it checks if the file exists, and if it does, it'll run file get contents. Now, one of the important things to note is that file get contents can return something that is false, or something that is literally the Boolean value false. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about yet, that's fine. Just understand that sometimes things like the number 0 can mean false despite actually being a number. And that's important because you can use that to do a lot of things. If I return an empty file, or a file that has just the number 0 in it, and I check if it has returned something using, let's go ahead and just do, this is going to be a config thing, config.xml. I'm just making all of this up. If config equals false, or as some people might do, if not config. Oops. If not config. So the thing is, not config is anything that resolves to false, or equals false is anything that resolves to false. It is not literally the Boolean operator false. So if your file that you're passing through, config.xml, only has one character in it, 0, I believe PHP will say, well, that's false. And despite the fact that you might have been expecting that 0, it's going to resolve here, and you're going to say, die could not read file, instead of going down here and just echoing your config. Let's actually change the language on this, because yes, it's blue now. Oh, it's wonderful. So okay, so the reason this is all important is this can also be 0 or a blank, just a space, I believe. There's a couple different ways to do it in PHP. So just checking whether config is not config for here, or doing equals false. Doing either of those two things does not work. If you want to check explicitly for the Boolean operator false, the Boolean keyword false, you have to add a third equal sign. And that is what we do. So this is useful. You basically are taking advantage of the fact that PHP is not a strongly typed language, so you're returning multiple types. It works. There are going to be people out there who say, well, you should be using exceptions. And you know what? Depending on the project and the people you're working with, they may be absolutely correct. But let's just say for a moment that you're like me, and you don't really like using exceptions unless you really have an amazing use for them. How could you get more information out of this read file function so that you can sort of be a little bit more, well, descriptive to the end user based on maybe how it has failed. Well, the answer, of course, as far as we're concerned, is the N2F return object. So let's start this over. We're going to say ret equals new N2F return. We're going to set return to be a failure. And we're going to return. If the file doesn't exist, we're going to add a message, and we'll say the file did not exist. Otherwise, we passed our first test, so let's do contents equal file get contents file name. If contents was false, and there's that triple equivalency doohickey. So if it is false, it means it actually failed. So what we'll do is we'll add another message. We'll say failed to read file. Please check system logs. I'm pretty sure there's a way you can make the system actually log that stuff with your php.ini. I'm not going to go over that now, though. You can figure that out on your own. Anyway, so if we've gone through here, we've already checked whether or not it failed to read the file. We've checked if the file exists. If we're here, we have succeeded, and contents, as a matter of fact, has whatever it is we might hope that contents has. So now we'll switch this to being good, and I will add the data as the contents. Close my bracket there, and now we can go through and use it. Now before we were just basically doing, if config equals false, right? Well, now you get to get these messages with things, and the reason that's really nice is what you'll do is you'll set up, you'll say, okay, so get our thing. We say read file config.xml, same as before, but now config is actually an object. And so we say if config is success, do that, and if it's not a success, we'll do something else. So we'll just do print r config data and exit. And here we will say if config has messages, print the messages array, and regardless, Pele's, please try again. So it's a little bit more code, but on the plus side, I now have a much better way of transferring messages from the depths of my code, the depths of my, my business logic, etc., up to the surface. There's another extension available for N2F called info boxes, and info boxes allows you to print really nice little error warning notice boxes on your page. You could use these messages to fill in boxes like that, thus sort of passing information along to the user without having to subscribe very deeply to knowing what is actually going on inside of these methods up here. You combine that with all the language features and stuff that N2F has, and you have a system that pretty well starts operating on its own without you having to do too much extra work at all. Anyways, that's it. I hope this was helpful, and if not, let me know in the comments. I'll try and improve next time. Until then, take care and happy coding.